African history is world history. I wanted to start this discussion on Nubia by introducing you to a couple terms or explaining a couple terms that I'm going to be using in this presentation. The first term I need you to understand is when I use the word Kemet. Kemet is the original spelling or saying of Egypt, and it was used by the Egyptians. When you go into the tombs and you look at the hieroglyphics and the writings that throughout, Kemet, KMT, is used throughout. So we will refer to Egypt as Kemet in honor of our ancestors. We need to start the discussion by talking about the environment at the time or how the environment changed, which is what causes human migrations. So, about 10,000 years ago, well, let's back it up. The earth spins, and as the earth spins, it tilts. That tilt is at about a 23-degree angle. Now, that tilt takes about 41,000 years to occur. When that tilt occurs, there's climate change on the planet. In Africa, about 10,000 years ago, Africa was covered in jungle. And as the climate changed, northern Africa went from covered in jungle to savanna, and eventually it turned into the Sahara Desert. So that process went from about 10,000 years ago, where it was jungle, to about 7,000 years ago, where it was savanna, and then about 5,000 years ago, it turned into the Sahara Desert that we see today. So the area that we're going to be discussing is broken up into four parts. There is what's called Upper Nubia, then Lower Nubia, Upper Kemet, and Lower Kemet. These four parts make up the region that we're referring to. In modern times, just to give you an idea, that region is now what's known as Egypt, and just below that, the Sudan. So when the climate changes, it causes humans and animals to move. Animals obviously want to go to where the food and water sources are, and humans who rely on animal as part of our sustenance and water as well, we also go to where the supply and food and water is. So as the Sahara Desert dried out, it forced people to migrate. And one of the areas where people migrated to was the Nile Valley. Now, the Nile Valley stretches about 4,000 miles, and the first 2,000 miles of the Nile Valley from the Mediterranean Sea to the first cataract, that is considered fertile land. So, for those 2,000 miles, it would flood every year annually in the Nile, and that flooding would leave black sediment on either side of the Nile. Now, that stretch of the Nile became very farmable, and the people that lived in that area, the Kemites, used that and were able to produce food for large groups of people. Now, around the first cataract of the Nile, cataracts are these large outcroppings that occur in the Nile River. There's about six of them. There's exactly six of them. And what happens is during certain times of the year, the Nile River is passable, and other times it is not passable because of these rocks. So when the Nile lowers in levels, those rocks are more visible, and boats cannot cross. When the Nile has higher river levels, boats those rocks are not noticeable and boats can cross the Nile. Incidentally, the Nile flows from south to north. So it begins in the mountains of Ethiopia, and as that water goes down the mountains, it picks up speed and gathers, and that turns into the two rivers we have, the Blue and the White Nile. They merge to form the Great Nile. That Nile flows from the south to the north and drains out into the Mediterranean Sea. It would take you approximately 3 months to travel by boat from Thebes to Napata. In 1960, the UNESCO project was formed to save archaeological sites along the Nile River who were going to be flooded with the building of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. This was a worldwide effort and much information was collected. This is considered when the dawn of Nubiology began. If you have seen CSI, You can only imagine trying to piece together the history of Nubia after grave robbers, political enemies, explorers, treasure hunters, and inexperienced archaeologists who use explosives have destroyed so much evidence and treasures kept hidden in the vaults of the elite as well, out of the public view. It would be interesting to find what they have hidden that we never even knew about. With no written language in Nubia, the earliest documentation comes from the walls and papers of Kemet. Kemites refer to Kush as Ta Seti, land of the bow. Kemet had a volatile relationship with Kush and needed Kush for gold, soldiers, trade with interior, and slaves. Thanks to the work of George Reisner, we now have a set classification for the different groups of Nubians that settled along the Nile. Grave pottery evidence dating back to 8000 BC has been found that shows proof of a complex society. With a social hierarchy, great care was taken for these artifacts to last thousands of years. We must also take a look at what we call civilized, considering what we now know. Little is known about what happened to A-group Nubians. 2,500 years after the disappearance of A-group Nubians, C-group Nubians appeared. Coincidentally, they settled in the same area of Aswan as A-groups and built their graves on top of A-group graves. C-group graves and pottery were considered much more elaborate, demonstrating a richness in culture. Approximately 2500 BC to 1500 BC, around the third cataract of the Nile, sprang up the Kingdom of Kerma, discovered by George Reisner on the east side of the Nile River. Kerma controlled Upper and Lower Nubia, becoming wealthy for its location as a crossroads between the interior and the Kemites. Because Kemet did not have gold, it relied heavily on the Kingdom of Kush. Much excavation is still being done. What we do know about the Kingdom of Kerma has been used to create a rendering of how the city once looked. Laid on 49 acres, approximately 11 city blocks, Kerma has been found to have approximately 30,000 graves. Around 751 BC, King Pianki conquered all of the Nile Valley to the Arabian Peninsula, unifying all the lands for the first time since the 20th dynasty 400 years earlier. This began the 25th dynasty. There were 5 pharaohs who ruled over the Nile Valley and lasted almost 100 years until 656. They were forced to retreat by the Assyrian army. The people of Kush would start a new kingdom at Meroe after the former capital at Napata was sacked by Kemites as revenge for the Kushite cooperation with the Hyksos of the 15th dynasty who were trying to conquer Kemet. The city flourished from 750 to 350 BC and was located below the fifth cataract. One aspect of Nubian culture I find amazing was their dedication to the matrilineal line of descent. This also meant many women could hold positions of power in the kingdom. Meroe was no different. The kingdom saw a succession of queens, one of the most famous being Candace Amanarinas. Between 27 BC and 20 BC, she successfully stopped the advance of the Roman army into Central Africa. The One-Eyed Queen, as she was called, cut off the head of the statue of Caesar Augustus and buried it under the steps of her palace. The Meroitic period and the exploits of Queen Amanirinas can be seen as the end of the Kushite dynasties. During this time, Kushites invented their own written language. Unfortunately, to date, we have been unable to decipher their text. Around 800 AD, St. Mark began a church in Kemet. Christianity would soon become the dominant religion in the region. To grow, it had to ban the worship of other gods. Nubia would also see pressure from the kingdom of Axum, which is Ethiopia, which was also a Christian kingdom. The small kingdoms of Nabatea, Makuria, and Alwa emerged along the Nile in the areas of Nubia. By 580 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the Sudan. Islam would sweep over the land in 639 AD. By the 14th century, Islam had full control of the region. So, some of the things that we know about Nubians: they were master pottery makers, they were master horsemen and hunters, they had royal families, they did have systems of governments, they believed in a matrilineal line of descent, they were winemakers and sold wine to the Egyptians. One of the main points of interest is they became wealthy because of trade with the interior of Africa, and they were at the intersection of what the people of Kemet needed and what the people of the interior of Africa needed. So the kingdoms of Nubia and Kush lasted over 3,500 years. African history is world history, and Nubia is no exception. People of African descent should be proud of their heritage, and understanding, having one eye onto the past, can show you the way to the future. This is Komi Gyamfi saying thank you for listening to this presentation and watching it on YouTube as well or other platforms. Please make sure you like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, and you can also find us on Spotify as well. Thank you.